Why choose a Sleep Number smart bed?
Can I make my side softer?
Can I make my side firmer? Can we sleep cooler?
Sleep Number does that. Cools up to 8 times faster and lets you choose your ideal comfort on either side. Your Sleep Number setting. And now save 50% on the new Sleep Number limited edition smart bed. Limited time. Exclusively at a Sleep Number store near you. Learn more at sleepnumber.com.
You're in a good place now. You are listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, we're going to be talking about boundaries. I know many of you know what boundaries are, but some of you don't know what they are, and some of you don't even have them in your own life. And that's cool, because on today's show, we're going to talk about what boundaries are and how we can use boundaries effectively in our day-to-day life. And you know, boundaries are something that we can incorporate in every relationship, whether it's personal or professional, whether it's with our family, parents, brothers and sisters, or with our spouse. And you know, it's interesting because when we really understand what a boundary is, we begin to create lasting relationships that are valuable, positive, and ultimately healthy to continue online with this relationship. Because a lot of times what happens is we want to do everything we can in a relationship to make the other person like us no matter what. There's no boundaries because we want to do whatever we can to impress them or to make us like, or for them to like us. But what happens is the relationship ends up suffering for it. Both people or one person feels as though they're not understood or they don't feel like they're being taken care of. And what happens is there's anxiety, then there becomes resentment and a little bit of anger. So why even go down that path when we can create some really healthy relationships right now? And so on Live Your True Life Perspectives, it's about solution. We talk about the problem, but we come up with the ultimate solutions to make our life easier. Joining me live in studio today is a friend of mine, a humanitarian, and the president and the co-founder of the Memnosyne Institute, Ann Thompson-Frenk. Ann, it's so glad to have you in studio today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Ashley. Thanks for having me here.
Well, it's great to have you in studio, and I think it's fun that we're going to be talking about boundaries today because it's so important in every relationship we have.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And it's interesting, I know that, you know, because of the work you do, the humanitarian work, the different cultures that you come into contact with, and the many different people that you work with on a daily basis, you understand this more than anybody.
Absolutely. And I think it's important for people to understand that, you know, cultures do influence how boundaries are perceived. I know the first time I was a student over in London, it took me a long time to realize that people's perception of personal space was really reflective of where they came from. So since I'm from Dallas, Texas, we have big spaces. And so I'm used to having a lot of personal space. When you get into the big cities, or you go, I'm still on the board of the Interfaith Center of New York, when you go to big cities like that or London, people are right in your face. And it takes a moment to go, wait a minute. So, you know, that helped me understand, you know, culture influences how people perceive, whether it's a physical boundary or a psychological or social boundary.
That's very important. And, you know, culturally speaking, a lot of people don't really think about that until you do travel somewhere and you're like, whoa, wait a second, this person's right in my face. And it's very normal for them. And it's almost like you're like, I can see everything on your face. You know how it gets really close. You're like, wow, you know, but I think a lot of people don't know about that. But let's go in and segue into the concept of the family boundaries. Mm-hmm. Because I think this is essential because our family is usually the people that we spend the most time with, mm-hmm. the people we see the most, for better, for worse. Mm-hmm. And it's like what we have to do to create those boundaries. And I think first and foremost, a lot of times when we're dealing with our family and our parents and our upbringing, the last thing that we really focus on is boundaries because most of our families don't even have any boundaries, period, end of story. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of codependency, and there's also a lot of, I guess, I don't want to call it neediness, but it's kind of the fact that there is no clear boundaries. Your life is part of their life. And how have you dealt with creating family boundaries in your life?
It took me a long time to really understand the importance of family boundaries. And part of that is because I'm adopted. So I always have this concept of, wow, I am privileged to live this incredible life because these people brought me into theirs. And from that get-go, that sets up a dynamic where you go, okay, well, I owe everything to these people. Therefore, who am I to say, wait a minute, don't step over that. And so you feel a sense of guilt. And trying to get over that I'm not going to lie, it took actually a couple of decades for me. But in the process, my mother was bipolar. It could be very scary. And so I love my mother very deeply, but she could be very, very terrifying. And learning at an early age to go, okay, this is where she's at this moment. It actually has nothing to do with me. So therefore, I have to psychologically go, even if I can't physically remove myself in the situation, this is her issue and not my issue. Don't take in any of this energy or negativity as my truth. And being able to select that and call attention to it consciously became a powerful thing, because I was able to go, okay, I can love you, be there for you, support you, and refuse to take in the identity you're trying to give to me at this moment. And I think that's something a lot of people don't tackle.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm glad you segued there. A lot of us do deal with family, parents, guardians that are dealing with a situation, a mental situation, whether that's a cluster B personality disorder, whether that's bipolar, whether that's depression. And you're so right, because when as a child, we don't really understand what's happening. Mm-hmm. And some of us, even in our young adult life, don't understand what's happening. Mm-hmm. And sometimes even in the 20s, you don't even understand what's happening because you're so close to that parent, mm-hmm. and you're just trying to do whatever you can to make them happy. Mm-hmm. Right. And to do what you think is the right thing. And so sometimes what happens in those situations is we get lost. Mm-hmm. We lose ourselves in that dynamic, and we're trying to, make them happy or do what's right or jump
mm-hmm.
through that hoop. And oftentimes when you're dealing with a situation like that, when you're doing the right thing or you're mm-hmm. doing what's perceived as right by society, you get the opposite effect. Mm-hmm. And so you begin to feel like you're in a blender of emotion because you don't understand, okay, well, I got all A's, at school. And so I should be getting the pat on the back when instead I'm getting the complete opposite mm-hmm. of that. Mm-hmm. And that's what usually brings us into adulthood, walking into relationships that are very mimicking the situation that we had with our parents.
Mm-hmm. And, one of the things that I've shared this with some of my friends who have been going through similar things in their life, and when the day that I really identified, and the irony is, one of my degrees was in psychology. So, you would think I could diagnose pretty well. But the funny thing is that it's one thing to learn something academically. It's another thing to really internalize it and walk it and live it and believe it. Because when you love people, they're inside your heart already. You've already got, they're starting off past the boundary that a stranger or a friend starts off with. So it's harder to not believe and internalize the things that are coming. But for me, as I got older, and it was really toward my early 30s, I finally was able to go, okay, you're in this moment. I'm going to call you tomorrow. I would say, Mom, I'll talk to you tomorrow. And what was ironic is one day she looked up at me and she said, you're not going to do this dance with me anymore, are you? And I said, no, I'm not. But when you're ready for it, we can have good quality time together. And sure enough, now we actually enjoy each other. We do things together. She's happier. I'm happier. So at the beginning, it felt like I wasn't being the dutiful daughter. In the end, we both had an improved relationship because we set some parameters.
Yeah, and that's powerful. I think that, like you said, when we're dealing with family, they're already in that quotient of no boundaries anyway. So it's like you're kind of going backwards. Mm-hmm. And I think many folks that are listening to the show right now understand that it's very different, but kind of similar when you meet somebody, a friend, or somebody that becomes a love interest, and there is no boundaries in the beginning, and then you realize where the relationship is heading. It's heading down a really tough road, mm-hmm. and you're finding all these issues, and you're seeing these red flags, and then you have to eventually establish boundaries then. So you have to go backwards to establish boundaries and then see if that works. And that's similar with family members, because when we're born, it's not like we're a child in the womb saying, okay, you know what I mean? My room is my room, and don't go into my room. And by the way, I have certain things. I have private time between this time and this time, and I'm going to try to figure out what meditation is at the age of 1. Please give me that 30 minutes of time. I need that out of respect. We don't do that because we look to our parents as gods, because they're bigger than us and they're in charge and they're taking care of us, know? And it's interesting. And I think that a lot of times we lose ourselves, especially when we're just trying to fit in. And I think that's what happens when we're kids, especially in the family dynamic.
And one of the things I heard recently, and I never thought about this, but this is so true. People were saying, don't force the little child in the family to accept a hug from somebody or a kiss from somebody they don't know. Allow them permission from that early age to go, let me shake your hand. And I started thinking about that. I thought it's so true. When you're a kid, you don't know this person. They may be related to you, but to you, they're a complete stranger, and you're expected to accept a big sloppy kiss. And as a little kid, you're going, ew, but you accept it and you're supposed to smile. And we laugh about it because we've all gone through it. But when you become an adult, if you've gone through that for years, you start going, okay, well, I'll accept this if my boss wants to lean a little too close to me. I'll accept this if someone wants to push their way into my life this way. And so we don't realize that we're teaching ourselves in the family dynamic how we're going to interact with the rest of the world. So we have to be aware of that from early on.
That's interesting, and I like where you're going with that, too, because I've been there before, you've been there before. I think everybody listening to the show has been there before. And a good example is going to a wedding that you're going to. I remember being a little kid and going to a wedding of my dad's sister. And I don't know if it was her second or third. She's very sweet. She actually passed away recently. But I remember going, and it was all these people I didn't know. Mm-hmm. And it was all these kisses and hugs and and it was like you had to do it,
Exactly.
And it's interesting, you're right, how that learned stuff when we're young really takes over our adult life. And I've had that. I remember when I was in my late teens, and you would go to an event or you'd go to a dinner, and it's like people would kiss you or whatever, or put a big kiss on your lips, and you're like, okay, I guess I'll deal with this. And now it's like, no.
Exactly.
Let's get a handshake in here if I feel like it. You know what I'm saying? Because maybe I don't even feel like it deserves a handshake. And I think a lot of times we kind of cow down, or we agree to do whatever because we feel like we have to, because it's based on precedence. And we don't even realize that's a subconscious thought that's really been integrated in the very beginning.
One of the things I've told a lot of women, because I go around the world, I speak to a lot of different people, but one of the main groups is women, is, there's a move women can do where you're standing and you put one foot in front of your other, so you're kind of leaning on your back foot, but that one foot gives you some space, and you offer your hand. That kind of gives you the opportunity to control the situation. Because I know a lot of women complain that, they meet a stranger and they grab your hand and they yank you physically into them, and then they give you this big kiss, and you're going, what? But you can control, and you are completely in the right to control how people interact with you.
Great stuff. When we return, we'll be talking more about boundaries, relationships, even toxic relationships, and what you can do to really establish those boundaries and have successful boundaries. Live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess. We'll be back in, well, you know it, I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
Turn it up and jump in the deep end on Perspectives. Now, here's Ashley.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, we're talking about boundaries and what boundaries are, and how we can actually use them in our day-to-day life to establish more healthy relationships and to really have the life that we deserve. Joining me in studio, Ann Thompson-Frenk. Ann is a humanitarian. She's also the president and co-founder of an institute, Memnosyne Institute here, and it's a really amazing stuff that she does, and she works with many different cultures and many different people, so I knew that she'd be perfect today to talk about boundaries. Ann, so we were talking right before the break, about relationships, and you were actually talking about how women can create personal space boundaries, which I thought was really cool. Let's talk more about that, because I think that a lot of times when we're raised, and I'm not just making this a female thing, men and women too, we were raised to, like we were talking about, getting the kisses from the aunts, the uncles, the people we don't know, having no personal space when that comes to it. And then when we get to become an adult, we kind of take that into our day-to-day life. What are some things that we can do in a social situation that we can give ourselves a little space and not fall into that trap like we did when we were kids?
It's funny that you say that, because we used to, my office used to have a lot of art gatherings and exhibitions, and there was one gentleman who was the sweetest man in the world, but he didn't understand the idea of personal space. And you could watch whoever he was talking to, they would end up doing this dance where they would literally go in a 360-degree circle. And if that conversation continued for any length of time, they might make 2 or 3 laps because the one person was always backing up and he was always stepping forward. So, I think a lot of people don't realize that they are engaging in this behavior. They don't see, okay, wait a minute, I'm making this person uncomfortable. But the idea in our culture is that we think that boundaries are limiting, and actually it's the opposite. Boundaries can enrich your life. And I think that that's the way we need to put this framework, is understanding that when you put up boundaries, you're intentionally cultivating the quality of your life by intentionally cultivating the quality of people that are in it.
I so agree with that, because a lot of folks out there, and I've done a lot of videos on this, on toxic relationships, dealing with that type of relationship dynamic, and how what happens is that when we're in a toxic / addictive codependent relationship, we feel as though we are walked all over. We feel as though that there's no division. We feel very angry sometimes. There's a little bit of resentment there, and resentment builds up in these relationships quite a bit. Like, you're always doing something for the other person. They're never doing something for you. Mm-hmm. They're never taking responsibility for their actions. If something goes wrong, you're the problem. You're the issue, because they're not going to take responsibility. Mm-hmm. But you continue into that relationship, and you wonder why you feel sad. You wonder why you feel depressed. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that we got to look at right now, because if you're in a situation like that, normally that directly reflects on something that you've already become accustomed to when you were growing up.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that a lot of times people gravitate to what's comfortable. What's comfortable is not always healthy. So if you gravitate, oh, I know this, well, ask yourself, why do you know this? Is it a reminder of something? If it is, well, then maybe you're resonating with something that wasn't good for you.
That's so true. Well, it is. And a lot of times we don't realize, because we kind of have blinders on when it comes to mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, aunt, uncle, whoever raised us. We have the blinders on because they're family, like you were talking about earlier. And I think a lot of times when we fall into that and we become codependent into their actions or them not taking responsibility, we feel like that's normal, not healthy, but normal. So we're used to it. So then we meet someone else that gives us that same feeling, that same attitude, the same stuff. And we're like, oh, this is normal.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is fine. Yeah, I had this for 18 years. This is good, And then eventually it's not good anymore. And you begin to feel like you don't have an identity, that your identity is taking care of this person or giving to this person. And a lot of times in those toxic relationships, the more you give, it's still not good enough, because when you look at the bottom line, the other person has to love themselves unconditionally. No matter all the love and the care that you give them, no matter all the stuff you buy them, no matter all the stuff that you praise them with, it's not good enough because they don't identify with that within themselves. So if you're telling them how great they are and how much you love them, they don't love themselves, so they can't even understand or process what you're saying to them.
Absolutely. And, I think a thing that's a very hard thing for me to learn over the last number of years, both on a personal level and in terms of my humanitarian work around the world. So this applies to both people as individuals and whole organizations or cultures or tribes. You cannot want something for people so badly that they are not ready to want for themselves. So you could give them the moon. I've had people who've approached me with, Marianne, I have this dream. I want to launch this company, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And I've sat down. I've brought up a business plan for them. I was ready to put capital into it. I was ready to do everything. But they couldn't take those first initial steps to follow through. They couldn't do what was necessary to go after their dream. After a while, I started saying to people, well, come to me with a business plan and we'll talk. It was amazing. 8 out of 10 people wouldn't ever follow up. You'd never hear from them again. And so over time, that became my filter. If you really want it, I'm not expecting you to have some Harvard grad thing, but, you should be able to tell me how much money this is, because it demonstrates there's a commitment that you really wanted whatever it is you want. But, that became a way that I put up some boundaries around myself to go, I'm not going to invest my time and energy and resources unless this person is willing to put that in themselves. And so I think that a lot of times when we go out, whether it's a relationship or a business situation, we are not intentionally looking at people as, do you want this for yourself? Do you want to improve yourself? Because I can't sign up on to want it for you. I can't do that part. I could do everything else, but I can't make you happy. You have to choose that for yourself.
That's powerful. And, as a therapist, it's kind of funny that you brought that up too. I'll have folks walk up to me in public places, different events, and they'll say, hey, I know you're a therapist, I'm going through XYZ. Do you think you can help me? And I'm like, sure, I can help you. And they'll ask for some, can you help me with X, this, I'll set up an appointment, whatever. And I'll say, hey, before you do that, go on and read this. I'm going to send you a link to this. Watch these 3 videos, okay? Because it's applying directly to what you're talking about, okay? And then get back with me in a week, and then we'll set it up. And it's interesting how many of those people neglect to read the articles I send. They're not long. Neglect to watch the videos that are short. And this is a situation, this is a really tough situation they're in. It's a life-changing situation. If they can get this right, they're going to change their life forever. They won't. And then they just want to come in. I just need you to change me. I just need you to help me. I just need you to make me better. And you're like, I just gave you a couple of things to read. And they don't do it. And that's the sign to me that you really don't want to deal with this problem. You don't want to necessarily get better, and you want someone else to do it for you.
Exactly. Yeah. One of the things, getting back also to the idea of boundaries enriching lives, there's a young girl named Wendy Saltero back in high school, and she was so wise, and I remember listening to this. Unfortunately, she was shot when she was about 21, but before that, she was writing a book, and they read it when she, at that time, and she said, I want to thank all those people who helped me. I want to thank all those people who hurt me, all those people who lifted me up, all those people who pushed me down, because you made me who I am too. And it was such a profound understanding. But the thing that really resonated with me over the years was that she would sit down with you, and she would really be 100% present with you. And if she wasn't going to be 100% present with you, she'd say, I don't want to talk to you right now. And at first I used to think, being a Southern woman from Texas, like, well, how rude. But then over time, I started realizing she had set up boundaries. And when she sat with you and she said, sure, I can sit with you, she was 100% there with you, really listening to you, really taking that in. And I started thinking about that later years when I had strokes. I started thinking about that when my father was passing away from brain cancer. People, when they focus on a life and death situation, they start curating their life with intention. And that means setting up boundaries and going, do I want to be with this person? Do I want to be doing this thing? Do I want to go to this party? Do I want to, how do I want to spend this finite amount of time that we all have? So I think, again, if you can come up with that understanding, that's going to help you in a toxic relationship. That's going to help you in business. It's going to help you in anything that you do. Is this how you want to curate your life intentionally?
I agree with that. And it's interesting, when I have been in situations, where my health and there was a possibility of not being on this planet, it does change your focal point. Like the drama that a lot of us deal with in day to day, that goes away. Who said what? Not even a point, right? Who said what is so far away, you don't even care. I mean, the text messages, that goes away. Like the idea that you didn't respond back to a text isn't even in your thought process. And it's interesting how the big stuff is all that's left and the little stuff just goes away. And I like what you're saying, Marianne, because if you really curate your life and you do that based on those principles, you begin to automatically activate boundaries across the board to create the life that you want to live.
Yes. One of the things I share with people that talk to me about boundaries, I said, imagine a dartboard, kind of, a circle within a circle within a circle. You're in the center of your circle. Outside of that is your intimate, relationship. Outside of that are, your closest, what I call spirit family. And they're not necessarily going to be your genetic family, your people who share your last name. They're going to be people that really resonate and get you, your tribe. Out of that, you might have your family. Out of that, you start having acquaintances, businesses. But when you start looking at life like that and you realize, people are various distances from where I am in that, then you start going, okay, I'm going to prioritize the ones that really resonate with me and that I have to get, to work with. Otherwise, in our culture, we kind of think of it all as being equal. It's not. We have to realize that we need to intentionally spend our time with those who are going to lift us up, get us going further, resonate with us. That's something that I think too few people do.
When we return, we'll be talking more about boundaries and also offering solution. And don't miss it. Coming up next, Reggie Harvey. Reggie Harvey's going to offer his perspective on boundaries and how he's created boundaries in his life based on his current situation, which I think is very powerful because it presents what we were just talking about, because it's all about where you are in life, where your mind is, where your heart is, and what's most important. Stay tuned, because Live Your True Life Perspectives with me, your host, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. You know it. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
This is Jake Busey, and you're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, we've been talking about boundaries. Boundaries, what they are, and how to incorporate those into your day-to-day life and into your relationships so that you have a powerful life and the life that you want. When we have positive, solid boundaries in our life, it allows our relationships to be made and created on solid ground, and folks know what to expect from one another. You know, it's interesting, when we have relationships with no boundaries, we usually feel disrespected, overwhelmed, we have some anger and resentment, and we feel as though we're being walked all over. However, when we introduce solid, positive boundaries into all of our relationships, we have mutual respecting relationships, or we end up walking away from that relationship and finding other relationships to spend our time. Joining me live in studio, Reggie Harvey. Reggie is a survivor of a near-fatal illness. He's the recent author of an amazing book, Anatomy of a Patient, and he's also a good friend. Reggie, so great to have you in studio today.
Hey, Ashley, it's my pleasure to be here.
You know, I love it when you come in because we can talk about some really awesome perspectives. And as you've been here in studio, you've heard me talking about dealing with what we like to talk about, boundaries and relationships and how to create them, because most folks out there, and I at one time or another didn't have boundaries either, don't have boundaries. And so let me ask you, what was the turning point in your life? Because I believe there's always a turning point. What was the turning point for you in your life to gain boundaries and to put boundaries on the folks in your life?
Well, you know, I guess I would have to say it was my mom.
Oh, really?
And I had a great relationship with my mom, but she was a very demanding personality. And I remember one evening, middle of the work week, I get a phone call about 7:30 in the evening, and she didn't say hi. She didn't say hello or anything. How are you doing? She just started in, well, you're going to pick me up tomorrow afternoon at 1 o'clock, and we're going here, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. And I listened to her whole plan, and I didn't respond right away. And she said, well, did you hear me? I said, yes, ma'am, but I'm not available. I never told her I was never available. I said, I'm not available. I have a job. I have commitments. I can't just drop everything at a moment's notice. And I said, obviously you knew that you wanted me to do this, but you didn't have the decency to ask me in advance if I could accommodate your request. I said, so I'm not doing it. I said, in the past, I have canceled on my commitments with other people. I have taken vacation. I've just jumped through hoops. I'm not doing it. And I realized that, oh my gosh, this was my mom I'm talking to. She's going to freak out. So I went on and I recognized that, you know, I had been allowing and enabling this behavior, and I had to address it some kind of way. And I didn't know how at first for a few seconds. And then I said, you know, I'm not going to allow you to ruin my memory of you. I'm sure you're going to be pissed. Well, that's on you. I love you anyway. I'm just not going to turn my life upside down at a moment's notice for you. And I said, so if this is the last time we talk, then it's the last time we talk. But no, I love you. I hung up the phone and I shook for 2 weeks. She never really apologized, but the next she reached out and called me and requested, let me know that she wanted me to be a part of some activity that she had, and if I could manage to work it out. And she gave me like a couple of weeks notice. So it's not so much that I drew the line with my mom and corrected accepted and acknowledged that I had enabled her and let her do this. But it was the fact, I was 35 years old when this happened. And I realized I could say no to other people. If I could tell my mother no, I could certainly tell anybody else no. So that changed my whole way of interacting with people. Not that I was trying to control them. It's just being honest. If there was something I didn't really want to do, or they didn't give me enough time to think about it or whatever, then I was just blunt about it. Sorry. No big discussion, no excuses, no beating around the bush. It's just no. And the lesson was, I'm not going to feel guilty because I'm disappointing you. No, that's on you. It's up to you to choose how you feel about it. I have no control over that. I'm going to love you anyway. You are still my friend. We're just not on the same page.
That's powerful. You know, it's interesting. We don't realize that we actually train people, and we can actually train people to treat us certain ways. We don't realize the power we have. And just like you were talking about with your mom, it's interesting, you know, how you jump through hoops, and then she just assumed that this is always going to happen.
Exactly.
And then you had to backtrack, and then you had to just kind of throw it out there, and then it became a lot easier with you and your other friends. So, you know, if some folks are listening right now, what are some things that you do on a daily basis to really make sure that you safeguard, you know, the things that you will deal with and the things you won't? You're dealing with the cans and the can-nots, those types of things. What do you really do to put that into perspective so that you don't let people walk over your boundaries and you don't have that anger and resentment?
Well, I think the first thing is to recognize that you are, pardon the expression, a grown-ass person. You're not a child anymore. And it's funny, certain people, especially, say, maybe elders in your church or elders in some social group, they still think of you as the young man or woman when they originally met you. And 10 or 15 or 20 years has passed. You are not 12 years old anymore. And you have to remind people of this gently. And to a point I think you made before, you can't be perfect with it, but you have to acknowledge that you have enabled the poor behavior. You are a part of it. It's not all on them. You're not blaming them. You're just resetting the clock. Whoa, stop. We're not doing this anymore. This is insane. So once you get a grasp of that, then you can start reclaiming your life and reclaiming your position and posture with the people that you care for. And like I told my mom, I love you. I'm not going to let you ruin my memory of you by this behavior. It's not acceptable. I let it happen. I own that, but no more. So you have to take responsibility and profess that to them.
And I think one of the things, too, and we were talking about this even before the show started, is that we have to be real with this type of stuff. And if we have a real boundary and we talked about it and we brought it up, we got to follow through with it.
Right. And you got to make sure that you give the person time to understand that you're serious. This is not up for debate. You're not angry with them. It's just you reached a point beyond which you're not willing to go. That's the line.
This is the line. And that's another thing, too, is that, you know, when we're dealing with family, friends, even spouses, I mean, this is a big deal because this can really make or break a relationship because we all have things that we want to deal with. We all have things that we don't want to deal with. And if we really just kind of adhere to that kind of stuff, not only does it help with the respect value, but we actually feel good about our family dynamic.
And I think the concept of forgiveness is a little part of this, too. And I heard this wonderful statement the other day. Forgiveness is not a line to be crossed. It is a path to be taken. What I mean by that is that confrontation that I had with my mom, it didn't stop then. In order for it to be effective, I had to practice that behavior consistently. And so in an egregious situation where someone has actually injured you, you can forgive them. It's not like you stop having a relationship with them, but it is an evolutionary thing. You have to work at it. You have to put the work in, and you have to have consistent behavior.
Consistency is key. So, Reggie, where do our listeners find you?
You can go to reggieharvey.net. That's ReggieHarvey.net, and find information about me, find information about anatomy of a patient, where you can get to it on Amazon, as well as there's going to be a new blog section and podcast section.
Well, I can't wait to see you next week.
Thank you, Ashley.
Boundaries are so important. You know, our time and energy are so valuable. Our self-respect, for that matter. And what I found is that when we actually have solid, positive boundaries, what we're doing is we're actually standing up for ourselves. We're being our own advocate. We're respecting ourselves so much that we say, you know what? I'm going to take the chance of this person not actually being in my life because I'm not going to settle for this type of toxic behavior anymore. And I think that's some powerful stuff. That's the awakening. That's the big awakening, because the codependent side of us, that side of us that was raised a certain way because we wanted to be loved, and that's what was the most important, and I understand that. But we did whatever we could to impress upon our parents, to do whatever was necessary. And many of us are still walking into our adult life, our mid-adult life. We've been married, maybe married once or twice, and we've still been playing that same codependent card, which leaves us naked from boundaries. We have no boundaries, and people can easily hurt us. And we allow this because we don't want to have anybody walk out on us. We want people to stick around with us. And we want to do all this just to keep them happy with us. But in reality, the thing is that it's actually killing us emotionally inside. And it's causing resentment. It's causing anger. But more than resentment and anger, it's causing you to feel sad, taken advantage of. The victim mentality begins to play a part because we feel as though all these negative things are happening to us. And what happens is we lose our identity and our sense of self. When Live Your True Life Perspectives returns, we'll be talking more about boundaries and solutions. If you haven't already, check out my YouTube channel. Go to YouTube and in the search, put Ashley Burgess. Ashley, Berges. We put up new video content every single week on subject matters and issues that are relatable and many things that you might be dealing with right now in your current life situation. Stay tuned, because Live Your True Life Perspectives with me, your host, Ashley Burgess. I'll be back this time. You know it. I'll be back in 2 shakes.
You could be my luck.
Get in here. You're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, we've been talking about boundaries, where we need boundaries and what relationships we need boundaries, how to create boundaries, but better yet, how do we do that? And we're going to be talking about solution here in just a moment, but I really enjoyed Reggie's perspective on boundaries and boundaries in our day-to-day life, because I think from his perspective, it's so powerful. Because Marianne and I had been talking earlier about when life is changing and there's a possibility of health issues or what have you that's happening to you right now, the little things go away. And your relationships become really important, and you spend that time cultivating those relationships, and you let go of the things that no longer serve you or serve your purpose and the highest of light. You know, joining me in studio today, Ann Thompson-Frenk, and she's amazing as a humanitarian, a good friend, and also the president and co-founder of the Memnosyne Institute. And, you know, Ann, right before we were listening to what Reggie's perspective was, which I thought was so cool, and you were talking about curating your life, you know, let's talk about the boundary concept, you know, because we can talk about, hey, we got these relationships, family dynamics, corporate dynamics, toxic relationships. You know, where do we begin? And I think we begin by creating these boundaries, but we have to actually know what our personal value is as an individual before we even know that we have to create boundaries or we need boundaries, or before we even understand the value of a boundary.
Absolutely. One of the things that I'd like to, using that metaphor of curating, if you picked up every knickknack you saw in your life and you put it into your house, you wouldn't be able to walk through it. If it'd be, you would have things that would clash. You'd have some Picasso-esque thing going next to some antique thing that it would look horrible. You'd be falling all over it and wouldn't be able to move through your house. And most people can get that. But so if you can look at the metaphor of like the house is you, that's you, your heart, your soul, your life, your mind, and you're trying to go around the world about doing whatever it is you're doing, going to work, being in love, raising a family, whatever it is, you have to say, what am I putting in this place? Am I creating a place of serenity? Am I creating a place that feels like, ooh, I can really get a lot of energy going in here and go after? Am I creating a place of inspiration? And most people can get that. If I was sitting here and talking about design theory, people would get that. But the minute you switch that and say, how are you doing that in your life? Are you creating and curating the things in your life that are going to inspire you, that are going to make you say you can do it? As someone who's been able to do a lot of first, I've helped negotiate the first treaty in 300 years between Hopi and Navajo nations. I've innovated Buckminster Fuller's formula to create, do the female figure out of his dome. And each time I did one of those things, there was always tons of people. And the first thing they would do is they'd come to me and say, you can't do that. That's not possible. That'll never happen. You know how many people have tried that? It can't be. And I started thinking to myself, and why would I want to be around people that told me that? And then I started realizing, we think of toxic as someone's got to be hitting you and giving you, a black eye. No, toxic can be that at its most extreme, but it can also be very, very subtle. It can be people that sit next to you and you think are your friend, and maybe they are your friend, but because they have self-doubt, they feel like they're being comforted by sharing that doubt with you, that you'll commiserate with them in it. And there's nothing wrong with having the mental, psychological boundary of saying, I get that that's where you think, I get that's what a boundary for you, but I don't accept that as my reality. I'm gonna go after that. And maybe you'll fail, but you know what? If you allow people around you, you'll never, telling you it's possible, you'll never even try. So boundaries begin in your own mind. What's possible and how you get a reminder every day that, yeah, go after that thing. A lot of that comes from how you're curating your life with intention.
I agree with you. And I also think it is starting in your mind, because a lot of times we don't realize our value. And if we don't understand our exact value, the power we are, the power within inside of us, what we have the ability to do, we don't realize that we should conserve our energy and we should create boundaries. And I think a lot of times we find ourselves, like you said, toxic relationships can be extreme, right? We can be physically hurt in situations, or we can be mentally abused. And then there can be variations of grades involved with that. So you might have, a friend, or like you were saying, an acquaintance that is always kind of talking about the negative situation, or this is never going to happen, or you're not going to be able to fulfill this, or wow, you're crazy to think that this is going to work. And that feeds into our negative broken record, internal negative broken record that questions our own self-worth and self-value. Mm-hmm. And then we fall into that crutch where we're listening to that person because they're echoing our inside storyline. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we got to get right before we even create powerful boundaries, is to understand, okay, wait a second. There's a part of me inside of me right now that is not my best friend. It's not at my highest good. It might be saying that I can't create something, or I'm not valuable enough. Mm-hmm. And we got to get to the crux of that too. And so being aware of those things that are in your way of understanding your value, because when you finally do let go of that negative broken record and that trajectory, you begin to realize the value that you owe yourself and the time you owe yourself to cultivate who you are. And that leads into understanding your value. And I think in that point in time, that's when you understand self-worth. Mm-hmm. Then it leads to the unconditional love quotient, which means I love myself even though I have a pimple in the middle of my face that looks like a third eye. I still love myself. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's an example, kind of joking, but you understand it's not based on all that, but it's based on the fact that I'm going to embrace myself. And that leads us into training other people how we want to be treated. Mm-hmm. And so I'm sure, Marianne, you've done that before, where you've been, whether with its coworkers or other folks or different cultures and organizations, where you in the very first moment, that you meet folks, when you carry yourself a certain way, you demonstrate things a certain way, and you act a certain way, you're immediately training those people and persons around you how you will be treated. Mm-hmm. And I think that's when you go, okay, if I want to be treated with respect, or I deserve to be treated with respect, how does that look? And then also, I'm treating people outwardly with respect and the same that I want back, because we get what we give.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that many people don't realize that, you train the world around you. And, one of the jokes that, Joshua gets, my husband gets annoyed with me sometimes because, I've told him, just because the phone rings does not mean I have to answer it. Just because the doorbell rings does not mean that I want to be home. And those are really extreme examples. But, in our culture, we all think, I got an FB messenger. I need to answer right away. Oh, I got a text. I need to answer right away. And people go, I can never have a moment alone. I'm like, sure you can. You get to decide how you're going to interact with this world. At the end of the day, are you curating time for yourself? I was talking to Philip Collins. He's our executive director, and he's an amazing man, offers cultural affairs, does all sorts of things. And he said, I don't have time. I said, tell me something. If you had an incredibly important meeting that Office of Cultural Affairs or Memnosyne said, this is going to make or break something, would you make the time to carve an hour out of your already planned week to do? He said, absolutely. I said, okay, the most important person that you're going to meet with this week is yourself. So I need you to set up an appointment in your appointment book and put an hour in there. And that is a set time. Like you have set meetings with everybody else, this is your set meeting with yourself. And during that time, that is your time to read a book, your time to meditate, your time to yoga, whatever it is you need to do, take a walk. And he started doing that, and it was amazing. His health improved. He slept better. He had more energy, and all he had to do is realize, I need to book an appointment with myself. And that took understanding boundaries, because again, boundaries enrich our lives. They don't limit them.
It's so true, because I think a lot of times we get scared because we say, if we put boundaries down in these relationships, maybe this person won't like me.
No, and they can be flexible.
Mm-hmm. They can. And it's like, the thing is that we realize that boundaries actually create really positive relationships, because if you put your personal boundary in, it's not like you're throwing a grenade, over the fence line and going, if you don't listen to me, this is over with. No, we're not doing that. We're just saying, hey, there's certain things that I stand for, there's certain values I have, and there's certain things that I'm not going to limit myself by. And if somebody doesn't like that and they're not cool with that, that means that they really weren't there for you in the first place. Because they really weren't on your side anyway. And that's okay to find out. We don't have to be best friends with everybody. I mean, that's why there's a whole world of people, a lot of folks out there that you can meet and you can hang out with, because some people might not follow or agree with what you're doing, and that's fine. Some people might not respect it. Some people might not respect your boundaries, and that's what you got to sit back and say, is this somebody that I want in my life? Or better yet, can I need to go back to the drawing board and figure out how and why I was in that relationship in the first place? And I think you owe it to yourself to ask yourself the question, are there people in my life right now that I feel used by? Are there people in my life right now that I think are taking advantage of me? And those are the first relationships you need to begin to look at and say, one, do I have any boundaries with these people? Probably not. And two, how did you get there? And three, what would you like to do to make those changes in those relationships? Do you think you can salvage them? Some you may can, some you might not. But you owe it to yourself to try to get those right. And I think that's being powerful, and that's being proactive and self-maintenance in your own life. What do you think, Marianne?
Absolutely. Well, one thing I'd like to really convey is that your life force, your being here on this earth is a present. It's a present to you. So your presence is a present. So if you are understanding that, then when you give someone your presence, whether that is at work, working on a project, whether that is your love life, whether that is people in your family or a good friend, whatever it is, you are giving them the presence, the present of your presence. So, if you understand that, then you realize, okay, is this something I want to give? Because you can't get that back. You have your energy, you have your time, you are really gifting that person with something that has a limited amount. So are you really wanting to give this to them? What I suggest, and I mentioned this last time, is, and I would suggest anyone listening to this, take a piece of paper, draw a circle and a circle and a circle, put your name in the middle. Out the next one, think about people that truly get you. Are your loved ones, the person that you're in love with? Who is your spirit family? Not necessarily those who share your last name, but who are the people that really get where you're trying to go in this world, who you're trying to be in this world and believe you. Put their names on the outside. Out of that, then who are the people that you really do feel like you love, but maybe they don't get you. Maybe it's an uncle. You love them dearly, but they're not going to ever get what you're trying to do in the world. But you love them. You'll be there for them. Put them in the next one. Then the ring outside of that, then start going to your acquaintances. I think a lot of people get messed up because they lump all the names in their minds all together. But if you can start really organizing in your mind how your relationships are with these people, and then understand people can change. You may have someone who's an acquaintance today who becomes your best soulmate in 3 years. So, allow that to happen. But understand that you don't owe anyone your presence. It is a present, and it's a present to you first.
Powerful. Marianne, thanks for coming in the studio today.
Thank you for having me.
You'll have to come back on.
Thank you. Look forward to it.
Awesome. So, it's really important to really think about that. I love what she was saying about the circles. That was amazing and powerful. And she'll be back on to talk about other subject matters. But I do think it's very true and very important to be mindful of your time, mindful of your health. Those are the two things that we really have to guard, and really spending the best time and really cultivating that time with the people that really matter most, and also spending time with you, because remember, our relationship with ourselves is the most important one we have. And when we understand unconditional love and we take care of ourselves, we take out regret from our life, which is a powerful place to be. Stay tuned. New shows coming up next, and Live Your True Life Perspectives with me, your host, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 3 shakes.